Imagine someone steals from you. There's no police to call, no court to file a complaint with, no written law anywhere on earth telling anyone what's right or wrong, no badge, no jail cell, no judge in a black robe waiting to hear both sides of the story. And yet, somehow, the thief still gets punished. You live in a world built on codified law, written statutes, courtrooms, and judges. It feels like justice requires all of that scaffolding to exist at all, like fairness itself is something that had to be invented by lawyers and legislators. But your ancestors demanded justice for hundreds of thousands of years before a single law was ever written down. Long before ink touched clay tablets, long before anyone carved a code into stone, humans were already holding each other accountable. So how did people get justice in a world with no legal system whatsoever? The answer involves public shaming, exile, blood feuds that lasted generations, and a surprisingly effective form of group psychology your brain still runs on today. Let's go back to the world your ancestors actually lived in. Small hunter-gatherer bands, moving together, completely dependent on cooperation to survive. No prisons, no police, no written rules of any kind. Everyone knew everyone. There was nowhere to hide and nothing to hide behind. And yet, anthropologists who study these societies keep finding the same thing over and over. They weren't lawless. They were something else entirely. Anthropologist Christopher Bohm spent decades studying small-scale, egalitarian societies across multiple continents, and he found something that reshaped how researchers think about the origins of justice itself. Bohm documented what he called reverse dominance hierarchy. In most hunter-gatherer bands, no single person was allowed to accumulate too much power, no matter how physically strong, skilled, or persuasive they were. If someone tried to bully others, hoard resources, or dominate the group, the rest of the band didn't wait for a king or a court to intervene. They didn't petition an authority above them, because no such authority existed. They handled it themselves, collectively, and often before the behavior could escalate any further. Sometimes it started small. Gossip, mockery, a pointed joke told just loud enough for the offender to hear it, delivered with just enough humor that no one could accuse the speaker of starting a real conflict. Public ridicule, Bohm found, was often the very first line of defense against anyone who stepped too far out of line. And in many cases, it was the only line of defense needed. Isn't it strange that shame, something you might dismiss today as childish or petty, was once one of humanity's most powerful legal tools? If ridicule didn't work, the response escalated. Ostracism came next. The group would simply stop including the offender in hunts, in meals, in conversation. No one would announce it formally. It would simply happen, quietly and completely, until the message became impossible to ignore. In a world where survival depended entirely on cooperation, being cut off from the group wasn't a minor inconvenience. It was close to a death sentence. Think about what that means for a moment. There was no need for a jail cell, no need for bars or locks or guards. The band itself was the only safety net that existed, and removing someone from it, even temporarily, sent an unmistakable message. Fix your behavior, or you don't get to eat with us tonight. Fix your behavior, or you face the wilderness alone without the collective protection that kept every single person alive. And if that still didn't work? In the most extreme cases, documented across multiple hunter-gatherer societies, the band would resort to exile, or in rare situations, execution carried out collectively by the group rather than by any single authority. Anthropologist James Woodburn, who studied egalitarian societies extensively, noted that this collective enforcement was key. No individual held the power to punish alone. The entire group shared responsibility, which meant no single person could seize control of justice and turn it into personal power. This is where it gets genuinely fascinating. Justice wasn't handed down from above. It bubbled up from everyone at once, generated by the collective will of people who had no other way to organize themselves, and who found, almost by accident, that consensus enforced better than any single ruler ever could. Compare that to how you probably think about justice today. A judge decides. A jury decides. Some distant authority, operating under rules you didn't personally write, sitting in a building you may never have entered, determines your fate based on evidence presented by people you've never met. Your ancestors' version of justice had no distant authority at all. It was justice by consensus, enforced by the very people who lived beside you, who hunted beside you, who would share their food with you the very next day if you corrected your behavior. Now here's where the story shifts into something darker and more complicated. Not every ancient justice system relied purely on gentle social pressure. Anthropologist E. Evans Pritchard spent years living among the Nuer people of South Sudan during the 1930s, documenting a system built almost entirely around something called blood feud. When a serious wrong occurred, a killing, a betrayal, a violation too severe for gossip or ostracism to fix, the victim's family held the right and the expectation to seek retribution directly against the offender's family. This wasn't chaos. It followed its own internal logic, understood by everyone involved, with rules about proportionality and honor that governed exactly how far retaliation could go. Evans Pritchard found that these feuds, as brutal as they sound, actually served a stabilizing function within Nuer society. The threat of retaliation kept behavior in check. Everyone knew that seriously wronging another family carried consequences that could ripple for generations. Fear of the feud, in a strange way, functioned as an early, unwritten deterrent system, not unlike the deterrent effect modern legal systems still rely on today. Isn't it strange that the fear of consequences, rather than the existence of consequences alone, may have been doing most of the actual work in both ancient and modern justice? But feuds also carried enormous risk. Without careful mechanisms to eventually resolve them, they could spiral indefinitely, one killing prompting another, then another, dragging entire communities into cycles of violence that lasted generations, sometimes long after anyone could remember exactly how the conflict had started in the first place. Many small-scale societies developed formal mediation roles specifically to prevent this outcome. Respected elders, seen as neutral because they had no personal stake in either family's fortunes, would step in to negotiate compensation instead of further bloodshed. This is, in essence, one of the earliest known precursors to what you'd eventually recognize as legal settlement, the ancestor of every modern out-of-court agreement and every insurance payout that exists specifically to avoid a costly, drawn-out fight. Cattle for a life, goods for an insult. A negotiated payment instead of a continued cycle of retaliation, carefully calculated, so that both families could walk away with their honor technically intact. Long before any written code existed, ancient humans had already discovered that structured compensation could interrupt a cycle that unstructured revenge could not, and that a fair-seeming trade often did more to preserve peace than an eye for an eye ever could. Here's the twist most people never consider. Some researchers argue that written law didn't actually invent justice. It formalized something humans had already been doing, instinctively and effectively, for tens of thousands of years before anyone thought to carve a single word into stone. The earliest written legal codes, like the Code of Ur-Nammu from ancient Mesopotamia, dating back roughly 4,000 years, weren't creating the concept of justice from nothing. They were taking existing social expectations, ones communities had enforced informally for millennia through gossip, ostracism, feud, and negotiated compensation, and simply writing them down for the first time, making them permanent, portable, and enforceable by a growing state, rather than by a small band of people who all knew each other by name. In other words, the law didn't come first. The instinct for justice did. The tablet was just the first time anyone bothered to write the instinct down. So why does any of this matter to you, living in a world with courts, police, and thousands of pages of written legal code? Because that ancient machinery never actually left you. It's still running, quietly, underneath every modern legal system you rely on, humming along beneath every headline about accountability and every conversation about fairness. When you see someone publicly called out online for bad behavior, you're watching a direct descendant of Boehm's public ridicule mechanism, just moved from a campfire circle to a comment section. When a community collectively shuns someone for wrongdoing, cutting them out of group chats, group events, shared friendships, you're watching ostracism playing out in real time, just with different technology carrying the message. Modern research on social norms and group behavior consistently finds that informal social consequences, gossip, reputation damage, exclusion, remain some of the most powerful behavioral regulators humans have, often working faster and more effectively than any formal legal process ever could. A damaged reputation can end a career in a way that no lawsuit ever needs to. You feel outrage when you witness unfairness, not because a law told you to. You feel it because that reaction is older than every law that has ever been written. It's the same instinct that once made an entire hunter-gatherer band go quiet the moment someone tried to take more than their share. The same tightening in the chest, the same urge to say something, to do something, to make sure the wrong didn't just slide by unnoticed. Every time you've felt the urge to call something out, to distance yourself from someone who wronged another person, to demand accountability, even when no formal rule technically required it, you were running code your ancestors wrote into you long before anyone thought to write anything down at all. Justice, it turns out, was never really about the paper it eventually got written on. It was about people, standing together, refusing to let wrong behavior go unanswered, long before anyone gave that instinct a name, and long before anyone needed to.